Hi everyone, I'm just looking for a song that I wanted to play and for some reason it's not coming up, so I want to make sure I get it. Okay, I think this is it. I'm hoping this is it. It doesn't sound like it's it, so we'll just have to go with it. Oh, it is! It is! This is so exciting! So, welcome everyone. Just gonna wait as everyone gathers together. Those of you who are watching and attending, you're totally welcome to share this link with your friends. The exact same link where you registered, as you've noticed, is also the link where you can watch the actual webinar that we're in right now. But those of you who aren't able to attend, or if you have friends who missed this, you can send them this exact link, and here is the where the replay is going to be. So I just want to invite everyone to do a little bit of dancing, get yourselves moving, because one of the things that we loved about Africa is how much people just shared a passion for music and for dancing and for movement. So much so that one day it was our son Aryeh Lev's birthday, and we ran into this super cute children's choir of kids who were Xhosa, I think, I'm not really 100% sure. These kids, and they were really cute, and they were singing, and they had so much energy and so much movement, and it was just sticky and contagious, like our eyes just gravitating towards them. And without my noticing, my husband Dave went sort of behind the scenes and walked up to their sort of the grown-up in charge of this group and gave them some cash and said, "It's my son's birthday, can your choir sing for him?" And so they did, and they started singing, and they were dancing and singing, and it lasted for so long. It was only 5 minutes. They were singing happy birthday to our kid with their own unique song, and it was just so awesome. So I want to invite everyone here to go ahead and move your bodies and get yourselves moving. If you're sitting down, stand up just for a moment even, and get your hands up in the air. And know that, Africa, that's why we're here. We're here to enjoy learning about new places and new exploration, and why we've been doing this crazy adventure that we call our African, exploration tour, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to allow the music to fade its way out. And Dave and I came up with 10 lessons that we got out of our time in Africa. And they really each came from a different place, from a different part of us, a different part of our experience. And I just want to capture that list and share it with you guys one at a time. Oh, wait, it didn't copy. Hold on one second. I just want to make sure I have it. Okay. So the first lesson that we got out of our experience was that if you're in trouble, face it. If you're in trouble, face it. One of the things that we have a tendency to do is, in our desire to be really positive, we don't want to look at the negative. And this is what Tony Robbins calls gardening while pretending like there's no weeds. He's like, I don't want to garden and be like, there's no weeds, there's no weeds, there's no weeds. It's like, no, pay attention. There's weeds in your garden. You're trying to grow and nourish a life for yourself. And it's really important to know if you have certain weeds that are taking over and taking up so much space and sustenance that your other plants get overloaded and crowded and start to wither and wilt. And this was something that was happening to our family. I think this is something that happened to a lot of people over the course of, this past 2 years of Corona craziness. And irrespective of whether you agree with whatever policies your country has enacted or hasn't enacted, or whatever international things are going on, it doesn't really matter as much as paying attention to your own experience in any circumstances, whether COVID is going on or anything else is going on, and just noticing, wow, are you not feeling good? Are you physiologically not feeling good? Are you emotionally not feeling good? And if you just keep turning a blind eye, sometimes things can just get so bad that then they turn into emergencies. And you don't really want to wait until that point, because then sometimes you have to put in really crazy emergency measures in order to deal with the thing you're struck with. And it's been a really interesting experience over the past couple of years, because I've always been like the emotional roller coaster person in our relationship, like the one who struggled the most with like mental health challenges and emotional issues. I'm just by nature a much more fiery personality, and also have dealt with more trauma. And so it was really surprising to be in like actually a really good place. Like when COVID first came out, I heard Dr. Zach Bush and also our personal physician, Dr. Simcha Shapiro, say the exact same thing. They both said that this whole experience was going to last 2 years, and this was based on, you know, previous SARS coronaviruses that took about 2 years to kind of travel through the planet, and then on their own, without any vaccines, without anything, they just kind of die out. And that's just kind of what happens. Okay, viruses have their cycle. This is just part of nature. And so they said this was going to last 2 years. So very early into the COVID process, I got 2 years in my head, and I was like, okay, this is going to last 2 years. My husband, on the other hand, he was like, didn't want to listen to this whole 2 year thing. He's like, nah, how could something last 2 years? He's like, my wife is just exaggerating. She's being like one of those like crazy people. And so he got it in his head, you know what? This whole closing down, lockdown thing is going to last a couple months, and then it's going to be over, and I'm going to go back to my regular life, and I'm going to be able to go back to, you know, pray and learn and explore and do personal growth with my community, and I'm going to be able to go back to the frisbee field and play frisbee with my friends, and I'm going to be able to go out without wearing a mask, and everything will be fine. And because he had that perspective, he got slapped pretty hard in the face when those 2 months passed, and he was still in the exact same situation. Whereas I had come into it being like, okay, I'm in for the long haul. It's going to be a challenging 2 years. How do I approach this? And threw myself into growing my business and into reaching out to more people online, as many of you have experienced. And that's just kind of how I approached the whole thing. And so I was actually in a really, really good emotional place, oddly enough, because I'm usually the one struggling with stuff. And Dave slowly started saying, with such like honesty and humility and vulnerability, I think I'm in trouble. And I think there was this confluence of just being his age and starting to lose his vision, because there he was in his like mid to late 40s, and kind of midlife crisis-y kind of point that just happens to guys at that age. And also COVID breaking down so many of the most important things in his life. And it was hard. It was like emotionally difficult. And at a certain point, he said, I think I need to get out. So we started traveling around Israel, but that became difficult when lockdowns would come into place and we weren't allowed to leave our neighborhood, much less Jerusalem, much less go to the cool parts of the country. And we knew winter was coming, which meant that traveling around the country was going to become more difficult. And we knew another lockdown was coming because we saw the numbers spiking upwards, which is exactly what happened. And Dave's like, I need to go on a walkabout. I think I need to travel. And I was like, whatever you want, honey, I'm here. I'm your support. And most of you know that we've thrown ourselves into our journey of seeking and building financial independence. And we're in so much better a financial place today than we were before. And at the same time, I'm like so excited by this financial independence game that I really don't want to be splurging a lot on travel unless we can do it strategically. And Dave's like, I don't care. And this is, you know, the second lesson we learned, that mental health is a really important investment. He's like, I don't want to wait until I'm crashing and then we end up having to spend a ton on emergency services. Let's take care of our mental health now. Even if it means that sets us back a year in our financial independence journey, it doesn't matter. I don't care what happens financially. We need to take care of ourselves. And thank God, despite there being lockdowns, we were able to rent out our apartment for the vast majority of our trip, which meant that like a lot of our trip got paid for. And yeah, we took like a bit of a financial hit, and it wasn't that big of a deal because we had such a rich experience that has nourished us in such a powerful way, and has given me some lessons that I can share with you. So the third thing we learned is that sunshine and fresh air do wonders. So I think I already knew this, but it was really, really cool to leave Jerusalem at the peak of winter when it gets cold and gloomy and rainy and cloudy, and it means that I want to get out less. And even when I do get out, I'm much more covered up, which means I get exposed to less sunshine. And when everything's locked down, fresh air is really not an option in Jerusalem. So it was just so powerful to experience the contrast of going from here to going to South Africa, which being in the Southern Hemisphere was in summertime. And the southern tip of South Africa, Cape Province, has a really awesome providence of having their rainy season in the winter and their dry season in the summer. So not only were we in a sunny place, it was a sunny place where it almost never rained. So we got to spend a ton of time outside. And I noticed that every single time I went for a hike, every single time I got sunshine, every single time I went exploring in nature, walking along the beach, walking up the mountains, whatever it was, I was just happier. I felt so much better. And, you know, like, no big surprise. We all know this stuff, but sometimes we take it for granted. So if you're just in a tough place, stop whatever it is you're doing. If you can, get up and just go outside and get fresh air and get some sunshine and move your body. And all of that together will just do wonders for your health. Even if whatever challenges and circumstances you're in are the same, you'll have more resources to deal with it. So lesson number 5, whatever number we're at, stepping outside your box gives you a fresh perspective. So this is something I've always noticed. I've been a world traveler since I was very, very little because I was born in Colombia, but even like since my infancy, we would travel to the United States and over the summertime. And I don't really remember that much, but I do remember just being a traveler. And when I was little, I started traveling to visit my grandmother in a small town in Colombia called Barranquilla in the summertime. And then sometimes I'd go to Panama and I would do this by myself. And so I'm just like very used to traveling. And I noticed that every time I travel, even to places that are very much home for me. So a few weeks from now, going to visit, God willing, my parents in South Florida. And I know my parents, like they're my family. I know South Florida, this is a normal place for me, but it doesn't matter. Just stepping out of my regular routine and giving myself a little bit of distance gives me the opportunity to have the objective perspective on my life that normally only other people have. So one of the reasons that people come to me for coaching, for example, is because they're looking for an outsider's perspective, like someone who can step outside and look at what they have going on and say, ooh, look, I noticed this and I noticed that. When we travel, even if it's just to a different town or a different part of our own country, or just going on like a hike in the woods, wherever it is you live, just that like stepping out of your life allows you to have a fresh perspective on what's going on in your life. And when you travel for a longer stretch of time, which can be like, I think a week is kind of enough to do this, but we had the opportunity of being in South Africa for 3 months. So for sure we had the opportunity to do this. When you step outside for that long and you develop a whole new routine and a whole new way of living, it really gives you the opportunity to just press the reset button and make a decision. What are the things that are really important for me to keep in my life? And what are the things that I can let go? Like, what are the things that just don't matter all that much, or that I've just been doing over and over again and don't matter so much? So what was really interesting was that while we were in South Africa, we basically isolated ourselves from most of humanity. That was kind of the point, was to be in situations where we didn't have to wear masks so that we could breathe healthy air, and we didn't have to worry about social distancing and all of that. So most of the time we were out in places where we could be close to nature, and we would just spend a lot of time hiking in nature, or we were in our home or something like that. And I missed people. Like, on the one hand, I learned how awesome it is to have time alone away from people for a long stretch of time. And it's something that I want to repeat every year for about a month, to just kind of unplug and just have time to sort of check in and be with myself and be with my family. But I also learned how much I love people so much. So when we came back to Israel, it was awesome. that the restrictions just had gone down and we were able to invite a lot of people into our home. And that's something that I really, really want to keep like rich in my life. That's been hugely valuable to learn. Another thing I learned from, you know, pulling myself away and having perspective is how important it is to give yourself time to just rest and play. I kind of had hit a little bit of work burnout because I told you I was like, boo, 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 going into my business, but there was a little bit of burnout kind of on its way. So I just gave myself a lot of permission to read books, which is something I didn't do that much as a kid. So I'm kind of playing catch up. And I must have read, I don't know, 2 or 3 books a week while I was in South Africa. And for me, that's like huge. And I've learned how much I love books, which to you must seem so obvious if you know that I've already published 3 books. But like reading was something that until I finished university, I didn't build a relationship with. And now I'm like madly in love with books. It's great. Okay, so another thing that we learned is that poverty is a mindset, not a color. Now, I have to be honest, I already knew this lesson, but it was like deeply ingrained in us. And one of the things that we did while we were in South Africa is do a lot of learning and exploration, partly for us, but also for our 16-year-old son, because he doesn't necessarily get exposed to lots of different kinds of people. You know, in your life, you just see the same people over and over and over again. So sometimes going to a new country allows you to just look at all of the different peoples and styles and cultures that you see. And we noticed that every country that we've been to and every place we've been to, irrespective of people's like skin color or culture or ethnicity or religion or whatever you want to call it, there are certain patterns that exist in poverty that we just consistently saw everywhere. And it's a really powerful lesson for us. So the core piece that I've noticed is that people who have a poverty mindset don't expect themselves to build wealth. And so they don't think about their long-term financial picture. They're very focused on their short-term financial enjoyment. And so we saw this in Scotland. We were on this random island where there was, I don't even remember the islands. It was like, I think off of the island of Skye, there was this like tiny little island. And there were, once upon a time, there was a shale quarry in this island. For those of you who don't know, because I didn't know, shale is this type of rock that kind of cuts itself in like squares, and people use it to build shingles for their roof. And so there were people who would come from different parts of like England and Scotland to come and work. And these are people of, you know, light colored skin, if we're focused on people's skin color, which I think is totally irrelevant, but if you care, right? I think exclusively men who came to work on these shale quarries, and they worked very hard and very long hours. And on the shale quarry, there was a pub. And at the end of the week, when people got their paycheck, they spent a huge percentage of their paycheck buying alcohol. And this is something that is actually a really big pattern, no matter what country in the world you go to, that there seems to be like a pattern amongst people of, you know, impoverished groups who, as soon as they get their paycheck, they spend a ton of money. So when, you know, as we were in South Africa, all these people were getting checks from their governments to kind of like relief checks for COVID. And we were hearing stories from all over the world of people saying that they were shocked at certain businesses you think would be shutting down during COVID that actually did explosively well. So jewelry stores suddenly did really well of people who'd never seen $1,000 all at once. And they went to the jewelry store and they spent their entire relief check on really nice jewelry. Or in Miami, Florida, I heard about how the Gucci and the Chanel stores had these huge lines of people who didn't have a lot of money going to the Gucci store to buy a really expensive Gucci purse with this wad of cash they'd suddenly gotten from the US government. And that was really interesting. Like when we got our relief check from the US government, we just went ahead and invested it in our same real estate investments we've been investing in for years. Like we didn't touch that money. That's not like splurge money. That's money to build our future. And because we are people who think about building wealth for the future, We're not people who think we're going to be impoverished forever. And so there's something like poverty is really a mindset of, okay, how much can I just enjoy right now because life is difficult and I'm going to be poor forever anyway. So I might as well enjoy this cash. And that might be, I might as well enjoy this chocolate or to buy alcohol or to buy a new Gucci purse or whatever it is. And this ability to delay gratification is really what builds wealth. But it's not just what builds wealth financially, it's also what builds wealth in all ways of life. It's what builds wealthy relationships. If you can hold yourself back from exploding in anger, which is kind of my big weakness in my character, to be perfectly frank, but like if you can hold yourself back from just enjoying short-term pleasure in relationships, you're much more likely to stay committed in your marriage, for example. Or if you can hold yourself back from, sex, to be blunt, while you're a teenager, you're much more likely to have a stronger financial and marital and family future as you grow older. If you can hold yourself back from breaking bridges with business people who you engage with, it's like all of the really important things in life require a certain amount of delayed gratification of like, I have a vision for the future. So personal growth is really important to me. Personal growth takes time. It's slow, it's a process. I have to be willing to like go through it. And so if I'm thinking about like how I'm going to grow, I have to have a vision of myself in the future, and I have to be willing to go through that slog. Rather than, today watching television, I could pick up a book on how to make myself a better human being, or I could choose to pray for an hour rather than, I don't know, eating potato chips for an hour. Like I could decide to like invest in my growth rather than just thinking about what would give me pleasure in the short term. So that was like a really big thing. Short-term pleasure somehow leads to poverty, and long-term thinking builds wealth and abundance in our lives. That was very much ingrained in us. One of the things that we saw, so how did we get that lesson? We did a tour of a township, and one of the things that gave me actually a tremendous amount of hope is that the townships, just so I can explain, the townships are these neighborhoods that were established by the apartheid government that were exclusively Black neighborhoods. So only people of dark brown skin were allowed to live in these neighborhoods, so that those people, God forbid, wouldn't go into the people with the light skin in their neighborhoods. And townships, just for whatever reason, I think because people just have a tendency to live close to where they grew up and close to where they know people, townships have, for the most part, remained exclusively Black. And there are other non-Black peoples living in townships a little bit, but they're mostly exclusively Black. And one of the things that's happened in townships is that there are certain parts of townships that have expanded to have like really nice homes that have a little bit of security and have nice cars in front of them. And that's the home of the doctor and the lawyer and this and that. It's like really interesting to see. But the vast majority of the township are people living under very difficult circumstances. They're using porta potties as toilets and living in shacks. And it's really, it's subsidized government housing, so they have really inexpensive rent of 250 Rand a month, and 250 Rand is like $15, a little bit more, something like that. 150 Rand is $10, so it's like $17, whatever it is. And we noticed that as we were walking through the townships, and we saw this in townships that we traveled all over the country, every time we passed a township, we saw this exact same pattern, that almost every single shack on top of it had a satellite dish. And when I tell you it's a shack, we're talking about like a 10, 15 square meter home that houses 2 to 3 families. And so it's really, really small. Often it's like a trailer or it's something made out of tin. And so people are living in really difficult circumstances, but they pay to have a satellite dish, and they pay 500 Rand a month for that satellite dish because they really want to watch soccer. And I'm thinking like, wow, what if they saved up that 500 Rand a month and invested it in building a future, in building stronger educations and building a business? There was also, we noticed a lot of alcohol and a lot of people investing in things that are like fleeting, like, hair extensions and doing their nails and things like that. And it was really like kind of sad because like these are luxury items from my perspective. Like these are things I try not to spend money on so that I can build my future. But if you're thinking only about the and not thinking about building your future. Like the people who had the nicer homes were clearly doing something different because they were able to get out of the poverty that their parents and grandparents had grown up in. So it's just something to think about. Okay, what's another one? Oh, this is my favorite one. My favorite lesson is ask for wonder. Ask for wonder. So that's actually the title of a book by Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's a rabbi in the 1960s, 70s, and in the United States. Sorry about that. Didn't expect the phone to ring. And Rabbi Heschel wrote this book, Ask for Wonder. How do I turn this thing off so that it doesn't happen again? Okay, I'm not gonna be able to turn it off. In any case, so he wrote this book, Ask for Wonder, of like, there's a way that you can engage in life from this kind of starry-eyed, vulnerable, curious, adventurous, little kid kind of place. And the reality is when you choose to do that, wonder is absolutely everywhere. And particularly in South Africa, because South Africa has more biodiversity just in Cape Province, which is just a slice of South Africa, than in all of North America combined. So every time I walked out the door, I'd see new plants, new birds, lots and lots and lots of new birds, and so many new plants. And you could go up to different plants and smell them. And the fynbos, which is the collection of flora of plants that grow all along the coast, has this intoxicatingly, amazingly fragrant scent of like something like flowers and cinnamon and woodsiness and earth all combined together. And I just couldn't stop smelling the fynbos. And it's like, you could literally build an intoxicating amount of joy just on something as small as a scent. You have to turn on that desire for wonder within you. And I think okay. So one of the ways that we turned on the asking for wonder button is by buying a national park pass. That's something that we learned how to do here in Israel. I don't know if in your country there is such a thing, but in Israel, you could buy a national park pass, which gives you access to any national park for as long as you want, whenever you want, over the course of a year. And in Israel, for a family our size, it costs like $100. Like, it's a really inexpensive investment. And as soon as we made that purchase, which we did during COVID, suddenly we found ourselves like looking for national parks and how many national parks can we check off of our list, and wouldn't it be great if we hit this one and this one and that one. And there was one day that it was 3:30 in the afternoon and the national parks closed at 4, and we were like, oh, we only have half an hour. Hey, let's go check out this one national park that we've driven by hundreds of times and never entered. And it ended up being like super duper cool. So the same thing happened to us in South Africa. We bought the National Park Pass, and it became an invitation to explore parts of the country we might have missed. And people kept asking us when we came back, like, hey, did you do safari? Have you done a safari? And the answer is no. And there are a few reasons. One, me being that the main area where the safaris take place also happens to be riddled with malaria. And I didn't want to get malaria, but I also didn't want to take the anti-malaria medication because both of them have problems. I was like, can we just avoid that? And you're also kind of in a car for hours on end on these like bumpy roads looking for animals, and that's kind of the plan. What ended up happening as we went into different national parks around the country is that serendipity took over, and we randomly ran into the most cool animals ever, from little lizards and turtles and bugs we'd never seen before to bontiboks and springboks and wildebeest, and just so many cool animals with funky antlers, and just to see an animal living its life in the wild, not because you got in a car in an organized safari van or, you know, like a park that's like designed for it, just because they're just living their lives exactly where it is that they live, is so much more like awe-inspiring and wondering, and it was really, really cool. So another lesson that we learned is that diversity is king. So this statement, diversity is king, has been sort of drilled into me by Dr. Zach Bush. You'll notice this is the second time I've mentioned him this time. He's a physician, also kind of philosopher, a very, very special human being. If you've never checked him out, I highly recommend you do. And he has done a tremendous amount of research on all sorts of areas of human health, from researching cancer drugs, to working in hospice care, to working as an internist, to now his specialty is the human microbiome. So it's like all the little bugs that live inside of us and outside of us and everywhere along us. And he talks about how the human ecosystem is very similar to the world ecosystem, in that the more diversity we have, the healthier we are. So if you think about a field where there's miles and miles and miles of corn, it's much more vulnerable to attack from pests and from disease, and also just from kind of the elements of nature, like weather patterns and things like that, than if you have a tremendous diversity of plants growing in the same area. For some reason, diversity strengthens the entire ecosystem and also invites lots of different bugs that kind of balance each other out. And I don't know, it just like all works really, really well. But the other thing that diversity of plants creates is that if you look down in the soil, the more diverse your plant life is, the more diverse your microbe life is. And microbes in the soil are what makes soil really rich. And really rich soil makes for really awesome plants. So this is also true for us. The more diversity of our microbiome, the healthier we are, the stronger our immune system, the more robust we are, the better we are able to just handle the challenges of life. And Zach Bush said something, and I heard him say this right at the beginning of COVID, and it like drilled itself into my mind and has been kind of a calling card for me ever since. And the way that you can enable diversity of microbial life in your body is by exposing yourself to as many different ecosystems as you can. So that might mean just driving 20 minutes and going to a forest landscape, or driving 5 minutes and hanging around a plant store. Like, it doesn't have to be that complicated, but every single ecosystem you expose yourself to is gonna have different microbes. And kid you not, those microbes, they'll just like be in the air, they'll be in the soil, you could touch it, and they'll just go on you and in you. And that might sound gross to you if you think that bugs are bad for you, but if you didn't have microbes, you would die. I'm gonna say that again. If you don't have microbes, you die. You have more microbial cells in you and on you than human cells by a big margin. And so you're really an ecosystem. You're not like this human being, even though you think you are. You've got so many of these microbes, and you want to have a diverse ecosystem. So we went to mountains and beaches and different beaches and inland places and hikes and all sorts of different ecosystems that rivers that we exposed ourselves to. And every time we did that, we boosted our immune system in so doing, not just because we got exercise and fresh air and sunshine and all that good stuff that you probably know about, but also because we exposed ourselves to lots of different microbes. But diversity is king also when it comes to people. That if you can expose yourself to lots of different people, then you're more likely to have a more robust and expansive experience of life. And I don't mean different kinds of people who think just like you do, but maybe have different skin color, because that's not diversity. That's just a lot of sameness with a different color skin. And skin color doesn't mean anything. It's just a color, right? Just like eye color or hair color, right? If your friend is blonde and you have brown hair, does that mean that you have diversity of experience? No, that just means your friend has blonde hair, right? But diversity, but meeting different peoples from different cultures, really it expands your consciousness and expands your understanding of the human experience. And Africa is like such a cool place to do that, because in South Africa, you have the native tribes that have been living in South Africa for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You also have the descendants of the Dutch who came and colonized South Africa, the descendants of the British who came and colonized South Africa, the descendants of other random peoples like Jews who came to South Africa for different reasons. And then you have Indians who've come to Africa looking for opportunity. You have the descendants of the slaves who were brought into South Africa from Malaysia and Indonesia, and they brought their own culture and their foods and their religion, their Islam with them. And then, of course, you have all of these recently come to the country migrants who've come from all these other African countries where the situation is worse than it is in South Africa, right? When we were in South Africa, it was 44% unemployment, but Zimbabwe has like, I don't remember, but 75, 95, something crazy like that % unemployment. So we had a number of Uber drivers from Zimbabwe, from Malawi, from Rwanda, from the Congo, right? People who had left their countries because of really difficult circumstances. And so they were so, so happy to be safer in South Africa and seek employment in South Africa and drive us around and tell us their stories. It was so great. And what was so interesting was to hear each one of them had a different perspective on what it's like to live in South Africa, what it is that they're looking to get out of life. The vast majority of them were working very, very hard towards long-term goals. There was this one man who's an avid Christian, originally from the Congo, but when the Congo got really dangerous and he lost a bunch of his family, he moved to South Africa. And he's this avid Christian who listens to like classes from rabbis, and it was really cool. So he was so excited to meet Jews from Israel, and he wanted blessings from us, and he was telling us how every extra bit of money that he makes, he gives to the Jews in Israel, because he, in his faith, he believes that blessing the Jews and serving the Jews will help bring blessing into his life. And we were sitting there being like, oh my gosh, this guy works as an Uber driver, which in South Africa pays very, very poorly. It's like he's working such long hours and he's giving us money, right? This guy is so wealthy because he sees himself as someone who has so much abundance that it can spill over even into giving to other people on the other side of the world. Like, to me, that is just a tremendous amount of wealth. And it was so cool to meet him. Okay, so another thing that was a big lesson for us is that narratives define us. If you believe that you're stuck, you're stuck. And if you believe that you have infinite amounts of potential, then that's exactly what you have also. And it's just a matter of what you believe, that the stories that we have about ourselves define us. And it was interesting to see for myself, somehow after just moving from place to place and kind of leaving my routine, and at a certain point I got COVID and also kind of lost a bunch of sleep. And then there was the stress of Israel closing down their airport and us not knowing if we were going to come back. I kind of sank into a dark place, and I just noticed the story I had about life, about myself, about my family totally shifted. And because my story shifted, my internal experience also shifted. And just to see that, right? And to see the story that we choose to tell about life can define not just us, but an entire nation. So one of Dave's biggest role models, probably the biggest role model in my husband's life, is Nelson Mandela. He has a huge amount of respect for this man. Nelson Mandela was the head of South Africa when Dave first went and lived there. And he was just in awe of this man who was treated really poorly and imprisoned for years, I think 27 years, something crazy like that, in Robben Island, which we went to visit while we were in South Africa just now. And Robben Island, they were in these concrete prison cells with no windows. There were just holes in the wall, but there was no glass. And it gets really cold and windy in Robben Island, and they just sit on concrete floors. And they were whipped and beaten and treated really, really poorly and had to do very difficult backbreaking work. And he came out of that prison and became the sort of the center point of how South Africa was going to shift and go out of apartheid. And he kept telling a story. And the story was, we are a rainbow nation. And that means that we're a nation made up of lots of different peoples from lots of different backgrounds. And that doesn't just mean you, it also means all of the people who don't look like you and who don't speak your language and don't have your culture. They're also a part of it. And he really inspired an entire generation of Africans to believe that South Africa could escape the trap of apartheid and not end up in crazy civil war killing each other, which is the track, literally the track that people were on. There was literally a civil war ensuing and so much violence between blacks and whites and between blacks and all these different political groups. And it was getting really, really ugly. And he stood over and over again and told people who had been oppressed for so many decades, you have to forgive. If you want to build a future in this country, it's going to have to be with whites and blacks and coloreds and all of these different people working together. And he actually pulled it off. South Africa has really left that ugly shadow of apartheid. Are there lots of different people living in different communities? 100%. But I have to say, if I didn't know the story of apartheid, when I went to South Africa, I was, you know, served by people of lots of different backgrounds as, like, you know, somebody at the cash register in a store, or as my driver or something like that. But like, so were Black people, so were colored people. Like, everybody was exactly the same. I walked through the supermarket and it was really Rainbow Nation. And I love that language of Rainbow Nation, because America talks about itself as being a melting pot, as if like everyone has to get absorbed into this one culture. But South Africa doesn't see itself that way. And so the vast majority of South Africans actually grow up speaking the language of their tribe, or the language of their what's it called, ancestors. So the descendants of the Dutch speak Afrikaans, which is basically Dutch, at home, and the descendants of the British speak English at home, and the descendants of the Xhosa people speak Xhosa at home, and the Basotho people, they speak Basotho at home. Like, they don't all like speak English. And even though you think of South Africa as being English-speaking country, it was so cool to hear so many languages. And they weren't languages of tourists, they were languages of people who lived in the country and so embraced their own culture. It was just really, really cool. So what else? Ask for what you want. Ask for what you want. I love that lesson. So while we were in South Africa, we wanted to stay in the most gorgeous places possible, and we didn't want to spend as much as possible. So Dave, who was in charge of our housing and in charge of the whole Airbnb relationship, would find these like gorgeous estates right on the beach. I mean, we're talking stunning, with like a beach view, tons of glass, beautiful kitchen, beautiful living room, gorgeous bedrooms, like everything just like so nice, and so much nicer than we actually live here in Jerusalem, because we live in a small apartment here in Jerusalem. And somebody would list a property for like $200, and Dave's like, I really want to stay in that place, and no way I'm spending $200. So I'd write to them and say, hey, we'd like to stay here for 2 weeks. Our budget is $80. And it was shocking to see how many people wrote back and said, we can do that, or, you know, the max we could do, the least we could do is 90. And they would be like, okay, we'll take it for 90, you know? And it was just really, really awesome. Because here for our apartment in Jerusalem, we were getting about $100 a night. So that like paid for our entire stay in these gorgeous beachfront properties. And all we had to do was ask. We so often are scared to ask, and we miss recognizing that sometimes somebody would like an opportunity more than they want exactly what they originally advertised. So just like ask. Sometimes you can ask for things for free, or you can ask for things at a discount, or you can ask a friend, hey, can you help me pack up, you know, my luggage for this trip I'm going on? I really don't want to do it alone. Can you keep me company? And very often people want to give us stuff because we love to be givers. So yeah, ask for what you want. And the last lesson is that everyone you meet has something to teach you. Everyone you meet has something to teach you. So this includes the Uber driver. This includes the guy behind the cash register. This includes the woman who welcomes you into your Airbnb house. This includes the there was a really cool thing that happened one day. Dave and I were hiking along the Finbos. If you know South Africa at all, we were walking on Hermanus Beach, and we were walking inside of the plants on the cliffs, looking out over the water. We had just seen a seal. I wasn't sure if it was a dolphin, and we looked at it, and Dave's like, no, that's a seal. And so we got to like ogle at the seal just to make you jealous, in case you're wondering what we were doing in South Africa. And we kept walking, and at a certain point, I saw these two women, and they were carrying like a bundle of herbs, and it looked like they picked them from the Finbos, as far as I could tell. They picked them just from the local plants hanging around. And I find that really fascinating, because I'm looking at the Finbos and I don't recognize a single one of these plants. I don't know if they have any medicinal properties. I don't know what they do. And I'm really like geeky about that kind of stuff. So I stopped these two women and I asked them, did you pick this here? And one of the women said, yes, I picked this here. This is a plant. And she told me the name, and it was an African name, and I've totally blanked out on what it is. because it wasn't like relevant to me so much. And she told me what it is. And I said, oh, do you use it for cooking or for medicine? And she said, no. She said, we use this plant as incense and we burn it in honor of our ancestors. And then she looked at me right in the eye and she said, this is how I pray to my God. And I don't know why, but that conversation struck me in such a powerful way, because the woman was standing fully erect with a huge smile on her face. Her skin was just like glowing, and it was just the sweetest, like shiniest shade of very dark chocolate. And there was no embarrassment. There was, if anything, there's just a massive amount of pride about her relationship to her ancestors, her relationship to the plants growing natively in her country, her relationship to her religion. And she was so proud to look at me right in the eye and say, this is how I pray to my God. And that was a huge lesson for me to learn, because I have to say, I think a lot of Jews have this challenge. We sometimes get embarrassed about our religion, or like for me, I know like amongst my family is not religious. And so sometimes I kind of hide certain things about my relationship to God because I don't want to make them uncomfortable or something. And she just didn't have any of that. She was just straight up, this is who I am and I'm proud of it. And it was just so cool to have her look me in the eyes, and it just that look in the eyes just like sort of was like a stamp, like stuck in my mind, and I'll never forget that conversation. Another conversation that we had that stuck with me was actually a conversation that happened multiple times while we were with Uber drivers. So I mentioned to you how we've had all these Uber drivers from different countries, except for one, and we had a good like 40 Uber drivers. Every single one of the Uber drivers was actually an immigrant to Africa from a different African country. Immigrant to South Africa, sorry, from a different African country. And we repeatedly heard the same story of how they don't feel safe in South Africa because they're immigrants. So you might think like, oh, okay, maybe if you're white, you don't feel safe in South Africa, or maybe if you live in a bad neighborhood, you don't feel safe in South Africa or something like that. But actually, if you're a migrant from a different African country, you get attacked because the local Black population sees you as a threat. And so a lot of people end up taking jobs as Uber drivers so that they're not competing for the same jobs that locals are often competing for, and they don't necessarily feel so safe. So we actually heard from a number of Uber drivers how they wanted to move to Canada, where they were going to feel a lot safer. So the Canadians here, you could be like, yay, Canada's great. It's a great place. Like, Canada does a really good job of absorbing immigrants and making them feel welcome and safe. And so, yay, good, success. You've done a good job. But it was like, I don't know, there's something about it that was really sad to me of thinking about a country that isn't excited to absorb immigrants, because here in Israel in general, that's something we're really, really passionate about creating a space where people can feel at home. And at the same time, I'll be honest, there are certain peoples who we don't have that like open-armed relationship with. And so in Israel, we're like really, really good at welcoming home and making part of our country people who are Jewish. And people who aren't Jewish, irrespective of what country they come from, we're kind of like a little bit more distance. It's like, no, you can't get citizenship. No, you can't get residency. We're going to make it harder for you to get a job. We see you as competition. You might usurp a bunch of our resources. And yet, you know, especially where I live in downtown Jerusalem, there are so many migrants from so many different countries who serve so many families that I know. Like we have, you know, people from the Philippines or from Sri Lanka or from Africa, different parts of Africa, like the Sudan, who come and work here and, you know, really help to support our lives and build the economy. And they're our neighbors, and they have their kids in preschool with our kids, and they're good people. Like they really just want to like do better and improve their lives and have a good future. And the question for me is like, do I make them feel at home? And with that, I'm going to close with a post-Africa story that has nothing to do with Africa, but I just love this story. So last Shabbat, my husband and I went for a walk in the park. So usually on Shabbat morning, we go to our local park. If you know what it is, Gan Zachar, it's sort of our central park, but not that big. And we just like going for a walk. And oftentimes on Shabbat morning, on Saturday morning, there's a cricket game going on, being played by people from Sri Lanka. So cricket is not a game that Israelis play. They're not particularly familiar with it, definitely not with the rules. Personally, right over my head, but in case you don't know what it is, it's kind of like baseball, but not. So usually there's like a, kind of like a pickup cricket game, but this time we saw like the fields had been laid out and they'd been marked, and 2 fields were laid out, and then we looked in the distance and we saw all of these Sri Lankan guys, way more than we usually see in the park, dressed in like athletic uniforms and different uniforms. There was red and blue and yellow, like there were clearly teams going on. And it was very clear that there was a big tournament of a Sri Lankan cricket tournament in Jerusalem, but probably with people from all over the country. And they had like a loudspeaker, and they were making announcements, and they were doing all of this in Sri Lankan, so I didn't understand a word they were saying until Dave looks and he says, look, they have flags. They had the Sri Lankan flag and they had the Israeli flag. So if you've ever been to a sporting event, you know that there's like a raising of the flags. We didn't expect there to be any raising of flags because this was a tournament, but it wasn't like some fancy schmancy, like big tournament. It was just like local immigrants playing cricket, right? But no, they like took it really, really seriously. And they had these 2 flagpoles, and they had the Israeli flag, despite the fact that no Israelis were playing in the game. They just wanted to honor the country they were in. And they played our national anthem, Hatikva. And it was just like amazing. We saw like 100, 200 Sri Lankans standing at attention to a song they couldn't possibly understand. It was like all in Hebrew. And they were totally giving respect to our country. And I thought to myself, do I give as much respect to them being my country as they give respect to my country? And it was just like a beautiful moment that almost brought me to tears. And our national anthem usually brings me to tears, but in this case, it wasn't the national anthem, but the honor that people who, I normally consider kind of like intruders or something like that, like they really were giving honor to my country, and they're so, so grateful to be here. And I now feel so, so grateful to have them here and have them be a part of building this amazing place we call the State of Israel. So that's kind of it. So I got a lot from Cape Town. Hi, Sue. So I want to answer, somebody asked me a couple of questions. Okay, so question number 1, did we go abroad because we didn't want to be stuck at home? Yes, we went abroad because we didn't want to be stuck at home in a cold Jerusalem apartment without any fresh air or sunshine or nature. Yes, 100%. And what did we eat in South Africa as a Jewish family? So that's a really good question, because as most of you know, Jews keep kosher, and there's this question, how do you keep kosher when you're traveling? So it just so happens we eat a whole food, plant-based diet, which means that we eat whole grains, fruits, and vegetables, and nuts and seeds. And all of those things are kosher everywhere you go. So we just went to the supermarket, bought whole grains and fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds, and we were good. And South Africa actually happens to have a very, very strong rabbinate with a strong kosher certification. So we were able to get some extra things like vinegar and mustard and soy sauce and tofu. I got tofu, that was great, but I could have done without tofu just the same. And other than that, we cooked all of our own food. We never ate out. And we did go to Cape Town for a weekend. That's where we got COVID, by the way. We did go to Cape Town for a weekend. And while we were in Cape Town, somebody told us about the kosher, the big supermarket that has a huge kosher section. And we walk into the supermarket and go to the kosher section. We actually didn't buy anything from the kosher section. We didn't know what to buy. Like, we didn't want the meat. We didn't want the matzo balls. We didn't want any of that. We make our own bread. And every Friday, we would make kiddush to sanctify the Sabbath on grape juice. So we bought grapes and made grape juice. So while we were there, we bought like a blender food processor situation, and we also got an Instant Pot, so it would be easy for us to cook food a little more quickly, so we could spend more time doing the things that we enjoy. So that's the answer to that question. And how did people react to us as a Jewish family? I love that question. I found, so there's lots of different kinds of peoples. I found that it's such a diverse country that people's general mode of being is just to be like curious and open and welcoming and friendly to everyone they meet, no matter what they look like. It was really, really cool to walk around with a head covering, because lots of African women walk around with head coverings, so it's like totally not weird at all. The people who actually got to know that we were Jewish had a tremendous amount of respect. So there were people who worked as housekeepers in some of the properties that we were in, that they just like worked for the Airbnb owner at cleaning the homes. There were 2 women in this one town of Clarence who were of the Basotho people, and they were Christian women, and they were so excited to like work for us and meet us and talk to us. And at the end of our trip, they took pictures with us because they wanted to remember us because we were Jews from Israel. So if anything, there was just this sense that we got, and we've experienced this also in Ecuador and in Costa Rica, that in general, people have a tremendous amount of reverence for Jewish people and a tremendous amount of respect, and would tell us that they pray for Israel and they feel so blessed to be in our presence. And that's like a lot of pressure, right? Because I'm just a normal person and I'm super, super fallible. But at the same time, it's this really awesome opportunity to practice trying to actually be what the Bible says I'm supposed to be, which is a light to the nations. And so really paying attention and being careful to be cautious with my words and with my actions, and be respectful and say please and thank you as much as I can, even though sometimes I'm more casual than that, to like really honor people as much as possible. Okay, do I have any more questions? Does anybody have any more questions? Michael had said that he had some questions. Do you want to write any questions? You can put them in the chat. You can put them in the question box, or we could just have some more African party music, if that's at all possible. Can we have African party music? Oh, okay. It's not going to happen. I can't figure out how to make the music go. But I want to wish all of you the opportunity to have adventures and exploration, and give yourselves an opportunity to step out of your own box, to pay attention to how much your stories are shaping your life, to not live a life of poverty that's just for today, but live a life of abundance and wealth, where you're really thinking about building an incredible, incredible future. And I just want to thank all of you who are here for your patience, because when we went to South Africa, I kind of disappeared. And I hope to be showing up a lot more over the coming months. And we filmed a course while I was in South Africa, and it's about to go live. I'm going to send you information about it. Okay, I got a question from Susie. Now that the mask restrictions have lifted in Israel, will I be giving tours of the shuk again? So little secret, one of the gifts of COVID was that the shuk business that I'd been wanting to close for 2 years, but didn't have the guts to close, closed for me. And so the government just closed all tourism. And that means that I wasn't giving tours for the past year, and it's been the greatest relief. So no, I'm not giving shuk tours anymore. Though if any of you happen to be in Jerusalem and would love to meet up in the shuk, I can show you some like little hidden secrets just for fun, because I love to do that. And yeah, I'm gonna go. Thank you so much, everyone. Have an awesome, awesome day.